aromatic, adventure.
In 1959, both Smell-O-Vision and Aroma-Rama were both introduced to United States audiences, movie houses throughout the country. The technologies were different, but ultimately the purpose was the same. They would pump fragrance through the air conditioner ducts, through ventilation shafts, to enhance the moviegoer's experience, to try to add scent to the film on the silver screen. Now, both technologies failed enormously, and the films associated with Aroma-Rama and Smell-O-Vision received scathing reviews. Even Walt Disney himself gave it his best stab to combine aroma and video, and he couldn't pull it off himself. But 60 years later, almost, I think I have a solution. I think I figured it out. Welcome everybody to the Candle Enthusiast. I am your host, Shane Carlson. That's right, the simple solution, go figure, scented candles. Why not burn a scented candle in the comfort of your own home during movie night? Why not? If you're willing to pair a fine wine with a certain cuisine or a certain dish, why is it so silly to pair a candle, a fragrance, with a film? And what better film, in my mind, a cinematic gem, the original 1978 horror classic, John Carpenter's Halloween. I mean, the movie just lends itself to aromatics, the setting of the whole film, the mood, the tone, the fact that it takes place on Halloween night. But what candles are we going to burn? Luckily, my friend Nikki from Washington Wicks has created two candles that are inspired by the original Halloween classic. I figured what I would do is take a close look at both of these candles, smell them one at a time, share with you my thoughts, my notes, my sensory evaluation, and try to create a little bit of smell-o-vision amongst ourselves. How does that sound? Sounds pretty good to me. Let's start with candle number one. This one called It Was the Boogeyman. We have the classic jack-o'-lantern, this fantastic piece of artwork that is very retro, if you ask me. It looks like one of those retro Halloween decorations that you would pick up at a novelty shop. Small batch soy candles out of Washington State. So we're dealing with a soy candle here. Glass tumbler, very, very opaque, heavy-duty glass with an aluminum lid. But you can see right there on top of the lid, we have a quote from the film. As a matter of fact, it was the Boogeyman, Dr. Loomis. So just to refresh your memory, in the final sequence of the film, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Laurie Strode, is crumpled up in the corner, and she's bawling her eyes out. And she looks to Dr. Sam Loomis, played by the great Donald Pleasance, and she asks him, "What's the Boogeyman?" And in great Donald Pleasance fashion, he cocks his head to the side and he says, "As a matter of fact, it was." Which is a very strange interaction of dialogue, right? Kind of leaves us with this question, and then the movie quickly comes to a close, leaving us with this question. For over 40 years, what is the Boogeyman? Who is the Boogeyman? In other words, who is Michael Myers? And is he the physical representation of evil? Is evil omnipresent? Is evil everywhere we go? Or is it simply just hiding, like Michael, in the deepest, darkest shadows of our own home? Well, I don't know. I'll let you decide on that one. But what does this candle smell like? Let's give this one a sniff. So everything about this candle to me is pumpkin, which is fantastic. But in a world that we live in today that's filled and saturated with so many pumpkin spice products and candles, this is going to be a breath of fresh air, because this isn't just about pumpkin spice. This is about the actual pumpkin itself. That's right. We do have the pumpkin spices. The spices that we would find in pumpkin pie, pumpkin muffins, pumpkin bread, pumpkin spiced lattes. We have the cinnamon, we have the nutmeg, we have the ginger, we have the clove, that's for sure. But I'm smelling that raw pumpkin. We've all had that experience with that knife, right? Where we plunge that knife right into the pumpkin, through that flesh, and experience the smell that it exudes. We cut off the top, we take the top, we stick our hand inside, and it's freezing cold, right? Because that pumpkin's been sitting out in the front porch outside, it's freezing. And we pull out the seeds, the innards, all of the goo. That pumpkin, that gourd, has that very specific aroma. And this candle has that all of the way. So we have the pumpkin spices. We have that raw gourd, that carved jack-o'-lantern. But there's a savory side to this candle as well. I mean, this is like right out of the oven. So we can think of roasted pumpkin with some honey or molasses. We sprinkle that baking spice on there. We have the butter. We have the salt. But I also want to talk about those spices again. The spices are in check, meaning it's not like one of those spice bombs, those spice explosions, like a stick of dynamite in the spice cabinet. It's not that. They're in check, but the spices themselves are so distinguishable. It's crazy. You know, when you buy a hot caramel apple cider during the autumn season, and you go and you take that first sip, and the whipped cream up on top, right? It touches your nose. It puts a little whipped cream on your nose, but also you accidentally sniff up a little bit of that ground nutmeg that's on top of that whipped cream. Well, that's kind of like what happens when I bring my nose close to this. It makes my nose tingle. It's definitely that ground spice compared to like a steeped spice like cinnamon stick or a mulled cider. But I did bring up hot caramel apple cider for a reason, because I'm assuming that there is a little bit of apple cider, apple skin goodness going on here, just to add a little bit of complexity, to contrast the pumpkin gourd notes just a little bit. I do get that warm mulled apple cider, or let's call it a hot caramel apple cider because of its savoriness. And one more thing that I have to throw in here about this candle, there is some woodiness or earthiness in some form of dried out vegetation. It kind of smells like dried hay a little bit. And what this does, it even adds to the realism of that dried out curly stem on the top of the pumpkin. I'm not kidding. In a world where we have so much pumpkin spice without the actual smell of the pumpkin itself, this is a breath of fresh air, because we get the whole experience. We smell the pumpkin, we smell the spice, we smell the pumpkin pies, the sweet treats, but we definitely get that experience of carving the pumpkin, which is perfect for the 1978 John Carpenter classic, Halloween. So you've heard my descriptions, what I smelled on this candle, but how does Washington Wicks describe this fragrance? What are their fragrance notes? Well, I happen to have them right here. Scorched pumpkin guts, drowning in a pool of melted marshmallows, crushed clove, and hot buttered rum. This candle, it was the Boogeyman. But we still have a second candle, and it's right here, so let's get to it. The Night He Came Home. The Night He Came Home was the official tagline of the film. The original poster artwork, right on the side there. The Night He Came Home. One of the great taglines of any film that I can think of. And on the label here, look at the artworks. To me, I'm getting a little bit of that scary stories to tell in the dark illustrations. But what we do see is little Lindsay Wallace's home on Halloween night. We have the jack-o'-lantern on the front porch, and then the shape, Michael Myers in his mask, knife in hand, and he's approaching that house. That's never a good sign. And on top of the candle, we have yet another quote. This one from Sheriff Brackett. This is probably the most quoted line from Halloween. It's Halloween. Everyone is entitled to one good scare. And I'm sure the sheriff regrets saying so, because by the end of the film, his daughter Annie, well, she doesn't do so well. Let's just leave it at that. But what does this candle smell like? That's the important thing. Let's give this one a sniff. Where the first candle was all about pumpkin, the pumpkin experience, the jack-o'-lantern, the organic pumpkin, the pumpkin spices, the pumpkin treats. This is all about the apple. Oh man, and it's not just apple. There's a lot going on. I can't identify like what variety of apple that I'm smelling, and I'll tell you why. This is like an apple melody. This is not just any one variety of apple. I mean, this has the sweetness of a red delicious apple. It's got the tartness or the brightness of a Granny Smith apple. But it's also got that really fragrant, powerful, rich smell of a Macintosh apple in here. So, apple melody for sure, but I suspect that there's other fruits floating around inside this candle, almost as if we're bobbing for apples in a big bowl of fruit punch. Why? Because I'm smelling things, a little bit of Bartlett pear for one, but check this out, like pomegranate and cherry juice. That's right, there's this luscious, fruity side to this that really adds to the apple, but just builds to the overall complexity of the fruitiness. I mean, this is like a cherries jubilee sauce right before we set it aflame. When I say cherries jubilee, I don't smell any booze in here. It's not boozy, but I do smell a little bit of woodiness, a little bit of oakiness, and a little bit of apple cider. There's an apple cider effervescent side to this apple aroma. So right from the get-go, a lot of things going on in this candle, but the apple components are very complex. Whenever we're dealing with the fragrance that deals with wood and apple, it can provoke a lot of different thoughts, memories, images in our head. Apple crates, apple baskets, like wicker baskets, oak barrels that we would ferment apple cider in. But for me, this is actually bringing to mind a memory that's quite personal to me. So I grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York State, Apple Country, and the neighborhood that I grew up on was developed on an apple orchard. In fact, the whole town, all of the neighborhoods were all developed on these very old apple orchards. So what this means is that all of these hundreds and hundreds of acres of apple orchards at some point for development had to be removed to build these neighborhoods. Kind of like the house in Poltergeist being built on the Indian burial ground. But from a bird's eye view, if you look straight down, you would see all of these neighborhoods on the rolling hills of what used to be these apple orchards. And every so often, you'd see these little patches of orchards that were untouched, neglected, forgotten. Because there would be a neighborhood over here, someone's over there, someone's street is over there. And then in the middle, you would have this apple orchard that had no access roads. There was no way you could drive to it. It was completely fenced in. The trees were God knows how old, gnarly and twisted, all from years of no pruning. The branches were tangled and all in knots. The grass was completely overgrown. I remember there was fragments and just little bits and pieces of broken apple crates, little remnants here and there, old stone walls that were crumbling. These walls had to be over 100 years old. I'm sure they were like property division lines at some point. But my brothers and I, we called these orchard cemeteries. And as decrepit as these orchards were, they still produced fruit. They still produced apples. There would be apples hanging from the limbs of these trees. Or if not, the apples would fall to the ground. All this fruit just cascading, mounds of apples on the orchard floor. So on Halloween night, what we would do is, my brothers and I, we would jump over the wooden fence of this one particular orchard cemetery to take a shortcut from one neighborhood to another. This way we could quickly get to the next neighborhood instead of walking all the way around. And I remember my brothers asking me, are you scared? You're not scared to go into the orchard cemetery? And I'm like 4 or 5 years old. Of course I'm terrified, but I said, no, I'm not scared at all. So we would go into the depths of these orchards. And the further we walked in to the orchards, the sounds of the trick-or-treaters, the buzz of Halloween would disappear. All of the lights, the distant lights of the houses and the street lights, they'd all disappear. And I distinctly remember seeing, visions of figures in the branches and seeing, shadow silhouettes that looked like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and of course Michael Myers, just standing in the shadows. But what I remember the most was the smell of those apples. That frozen, half-frozen fruit that's just sitting outside in the, at the end of October. Way more powerful, the aroma, than you'd possibly imagine. Those apples were left there to just wither away in those orchard cemeteries. And let me tell you, that's what this candle is reminding me of. We get the sweet apples, we get a little bit of the fermented apples on the forest floor, but we're also getting the autumn foliage, the crushed leaves. We're getting the woodiness of the branches, those gnarly trees in the orchards, the overgrown vegetation. And don't forget, it's Halloween night. It is cold. And all of that, at some capacity, for me, is happening inside of this candle. And how perfect, how suitable is that for the John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween film? Blood red apples, dead leaves, and the sweet smell of innocent teens permeates the cool evening air on that fateful Halloween night. So for me, the night he came home, a total outdoor Halloween night, freezing cold experience. Outdoors, apples all of the way, where on the flip side of the coin, it was the Boogeyman. It was more of that warm indoor, carving the jack-o'-lantern, pumpkin spice, pumpkin sweet treats experience. So 2 completely different candles. So we could burn either one of these candles while watching Halloween, that's for sure. But something that I want to do, I will do, because I have both of these candles, I am going to light both of them while I watch Halloween this Halloween season. So I get that mixture, that beautiful mixture, a little bit of the warm indoor smell coming from this direction, a little bit of that cold apple orchard smell coming from that direction, and let that cacophony of fragrance enhance my cinematic viewing experience of Halloween this season. So check it out, folks. That's it. These are from Washington Wicks. Make sure you check out the description below. I'm going to link Washington Wicks up. Some of these might be sold out. I don't know, but don't wait too long. Not only probably will they completely sell out, but you don't want to be getting these a couple days before Halloween. You want to have them for the majority of the season. Washington Wicks has so many amazing fragrances, not just these two. There's a whole array. Everything from earthy and gothic to fun and spooky to just outright deliciousness. There's something for everybody. Trust me, this is not a sponsored video. This is not an ad. She's a dear friend of mine, and I'm so excited. That's gonna be it for me tonight, folks. Thank you so much for joining. I will be seeing you soon, but until then, be good and stay safe.